Today we'll discuss one of the most confusing engines Ford has ever produced, and that is the 351. So in our last engine video, we talked about the difference between a small block and a big block engine. And I was a bit remiss in not really being clear that Ford doesn't really use those terms. Big block and small block are typically Chevy terms, but they have transferred over to the Fords, as some people refer to the bigger bore spacing blocks as big blocks, and again the smaller ones being small blocks. But Ford goes by engine families, and they have three distinct engine families. You have your Windsor engine family, you have your 335 engine family, and you have your 385 engine family. Now, where does the 351 fall? Well, that's why a lot of people are confused, because Ford has offered three 351 engines in their history. You have your 351 Windsor, you have your 351 Cleveland, and your 351M. So what is the difference? I mean, all three engines have the same displacement, but all the engines are extremely different, so let's talk about it. So in 1969, Ford was looking for a little larger engine option and came out with the 351 Windsor. And Windsor was around a long time, and Ford made a ton of them. It was actually used all the way through '95 in the Cobra R, and Saleen even used it through 1999 in their S-351. Now in 1970, the 351 Cleveland arrived, but only lasted a few years. And then shortly after that, the 351M arrived. Now, a lot of people question what the M means. The 351 Cleveland is the Cleveland engine plant, and the 351 Windsor is the Windsor engine plant. So what does the M stand for? Well, funny enough, Ford actually never explained that. A lot of people consider it to be an M for modified, because it was a modified version of the 400. Some people say it is from Michigan, because it was made in the Michigan Casting Center. And some people say it's so generic that M is halfway between C and W in the alphabet. And the M was never a performance engine and never found its way into a Mustang and was discontinued a few years later. Now, what is the difference between the three engines? Well, let's start with the 351 Windsor. The 351 Windsor, like I said, is part of the Windsor engine family, which includes the 260, the 289, the 302, and the 351 Windsor. Now here on the table, I have a 302 and a 351. Now basically, when Ford came out with the Windsor, they were looking for a bigger engine, something more powerful than your 302, but didn't want to go through the trouble of recasting and building an entire new engine, hence the 351 Windsor. Styling-wise, the blocks look almost the same. The difference is going to be the deck height, or the height of the block here. Now, the reason for that is both these engines have the same bore. They have a 4-inch bore. Now, your 302 has a 3-inch stroke, which equals 302 cubic inches. By going to a taller deck on the 351, this will allow for a 3.5-inch stroke, hence the 351 cubic inches. So again, these blocks look almost identical, but that added deck height allows the 351 Windsor to have more cubic inches, and again, more potential for more horsepower. Now, if you're ever looking, the front here is the easiest way to tell your 302 from your 351. I mean, it's written in the values and places you can look, but on the outside of the engine, you look right here. You can see the height difference from where the distributor mounts is over an inch on the Windsor 351 versus the 302. Again, that additional inch is what allows for more stroke and more cubic inches. And like I said before, the 351 Windsor was the most popular of the 351s and was definitely around the longest. Now, it made 290 horsepower back in the 60s and a peak of 300 in the 95 Cobra R. Now, one of the reasons these engines were so popular is because being part of the Windsor engine family, a lot of the parts from the 302 will transfer over to the 351. It makes it a lot easier for doing swaps and stuff like that. And again, there's millions of these out there, and they're a great way to make horsepower, which makes the Windsor very popular. So let's talk about the 351 Cleveland. Now, obviously, this is still my 351 Windsor. I don't have a Cleveland handy, but the 351 Windsor and 351 Cleveland only share one thing, and that is displacement. Now, how do you get the displacement? Same bore and same stroke. So basically, if you look at a Cleveland, you're going to have the same openings here, the same 4-inch, and you'll have the same 3.5-inch stroke to get 351 cubic inches. The block, though, is entirely different. It is lower, it is wider, it's a completely different casting made in the Cleveland casting plant, and it was an entirely new engine Ford brought out in 1970. And again, like I said, it shares the displacement, but it shares nothing else with the Windsor. So where the Cleveland really made power and was very popular with enthusiasts was because of the head design. They used canted valves, which were first seen in the 69 Boss 302 and then used in all the 351 Clevelands. Now, the canted valves has the valves at a slight angle. What that does, it allows for a much larger valve. Now, there were two versions of the Cleveland heads. You had one designed for the 2-barrel carburetors and one designed for the 4-barrel carburetors. Now, your 2-barrel carburetors had a 2.04 165 valve set, where your 4 barrels had a massive 2.19 171. This allowed for a lot of airflow, which made the Cleveland very popular with a lot of performance enthusiasts. Unfortunately, due to a lot of gas changes and changing of the auto industry in 1974, the Cleveland went away. And then the last and definitely least of the 351 engines is the 351M. Now we're going to go with modified as what the M stands for because it's a de-stroked version of the Ford 400. Now the 400, the 351M, and 351 Cleveland are part of that 335 engine series. So basically the 400 could have been a bigger Cleveland and could have been a great performance engine. But again, it was de-stroked to 351 because of the gas crisis and a lot of other issues in the 70s. They also never made a performance version of the 351M. It had a 2-barrel carburetor and made a max of 150 horsepower, which basically made it a lame engine. It was used a lot in sedans, station wagons, and small pickup trucks, and then finally was discontinued in 1982. An interesting fact here, the 351M and the 400 were the last new pushrod engines that Ford designed until the Godzilla came out in 2020. So in the beginning I talked about small blocks and big blocks and engine families because people ask all the time, is the 351M and 351 Cleveland considered to be big block engines? So according to Ford, Ford doesn't say small block or big block. Now a lot of enthusiasts consider the Windsors to be small blocks, and they consider the 429, 460, those 385 series engines to be big blocks because of the bore spacing. So where does that leave the 351M and 351C? Well, it leaves them right in the middle. Because basically, their bore spacing is going to be the same as the smaller Ford motors, but yet the bell housing is the same as the larger Ford motors. So is it a mid-block? You know, maybe you can call it what you want, but that's why Ford goes with the engine series. That's why you have your Windsor, your 335s, and your 385s.